International Affairs, and we want to welcome you all to our first Election Night Watch Party at the Maxwell School. This is apparently the first time that a student-run party in this size has been organized, so hopefully we'll have this again in 4 years. Depends on how you like it. I organized this event initially as just part of my social media in the 2012 election class, and then I was approached by several students who said, wouldn't it be great if we can open this up to the whole Maxwell community? And the students really helped to organize this event. And by this morning, about 160 people have RSVP'd. So we are expecting many more people to join us tonight. We are tweeting, as you can see here on the middle screen, and also on the small screen there in the middle. So if you are on Twitter, you can use the hashtag ElectionSU, and we will stream it here on our middle screen. We also have several other screens around, and we'll be live streaming some of the results later, and we will turn up the volume later on. Before I tell you more how the program will evolve, I would like to invite Professor Maxwell to give a few welcome notes on behalf of the Dean's Office.
Thank you, Professor Miracle. I was asked by Dean Steinberg and Dean Wasilenko to pull out my old rumpled dean's hat from years gone by and to stand in for them tonight in welcoming you all to this event. I'm reminded that almost 25 years ago, John Palmer and I were beginning the design of this building and this space, and it was, in our view then, to be used for exactly these kinds of occasions. And so I want to thank Professor Marigold, her students, for finally putting this space to the use that it was intended for. Thank you. And so, once again, on behalf of Dean Steinberg and Dean Wasilenko, I welcome you all, and I thank you.
Thank you so much, Bob.
Thank you, Professor Marvel. So Andrew and I tonight are the Candy Crowley, the Wolf Blitzer, the Martha Raddatz, the Anderson Cooper for this party. And we're very, very excited to be here. So without further ado, we're going to start with our lineup of speakers. Each speaker, as Professor Merville mentioned, will speak for 5 minutes, and then we're going to open up the floor to questions. Andrew McQuaid will be our reporter in the field. So if you have a question, find him, flag him down, and we'll try to get your question in. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Leonard Berman. Professor Berman is a professor of public administration and international affairs here at the Maxwell School, a nationally recognized specialist on U.S. tax policy. Dr. Berman's professional service includes positions as research associate for the National Bureau of Economic Research and an affiliated scholar at the Urban Institute. He is also one of my favorite bloggers on Forbes.com. Dr. Berman, will you please join us?
Thank you, Emily. When you said this was like the debates, I thought I should go around and be really obnoxious. Or maybe I should pretend I'm not even interested in being here. Louder, yes. Okay, here's for the deaf woman in the... okay, I've already blown half a minute of my 5 minutes, and I can never talk about tax policy for less than an hour, so you're in big trouble. The setting, very, very briefly, is that there are a number of issues related to tax policy. How many people have heard of the fiscal cliff? Woo! Now we're about to dive off the fiscal cliff at the end of the year. A big part of the fiscal cliff is the expiration of all the tax cuts that were enacted in the Bush administration and have been extended for 2 more years. In addition, there's the alternative minimum tax, which was actually put in the tax code by saboteurs who hated America. And it's been extended every year or two ever since. And it's anyway, if you want to learn about that, you can try to take my class in the spring. Or you could read my brand new book called Taxes in America, What Everyone Needs to Know, Oxford University Press. How many times can I plug that? The tax code doesn't raise enough revenue. Tax revenues right now in the United States are at the lowest level since the Truman administration. That was even before I was born, and that was a long time ago. We're running huge deficits. Running deficits during a recession makes sense because it's a way for the government to spend the money the private sector isn't and hopefully get the economy going again. But we will be running deficits even after we get out of the recession unless we do something about the tax code and also about spending on entitlements. We have a weak economy, which I mentioned, and obviously that affects what we can do on the tax side. The tax code is a hideous mess of complexity. The alternative minimum tax is the poster child, but if any of you have done your taxes, you must know that it's way more complicated than it needs to be. There are some issues that are more salient to one side than the other. Mitt Romney is very concerned about economic growth, and that's been a big focus on his discussion in his electioneering. President Obama cares about economic growth too, but he basically thinks that his policies are already going to get us on the path to get economic growth. The President has raised real concerns about the distribution of income, and particularly about the issue that he thinks that high-income people don't pay enough taxes. So that's a big divide between the two candidates. In terms of the proposals, President Obama's proposals are basically in his budget, plus some random statements he's made on the side. President Obama would raise several $1 trillion in additional revenue from taxes, not anywhere near enough to get the budget into balance, but it would reduce the deficit somewhat. He would extend almost all of the Bush tax cuts except for high-income people, defined as families with incomes over $250,000. He would extend the alternative minimum tax, the indexing of the alternative minimum tax, but he wouldn't eliminate it altogether. He would actually create several new kinds of alternative minimum taxes, which actually is not a good idea, but it sounds good when he describes them. He talks about this thing called the Buffett rule, which was inspired by Warren Buffett, who said that millionaires shouldn't pay less tax than their secretaries. The principle is fine, and we have a tax system where high-income people can pay very little taxes. But this would actually create another new minimum tax, and the providence is exactly the same as what motivated the AMT in the first place. Basically, politicians not wanting to deal with the underlying problems of the tax code, but put on another Band-Aid. The president, well, a couple of other things I don't have time to talk about. He would reform the corporate tax system, 1 minute. So what Mitt Romney would do is, actually the only thing we know for sure is that he doesn't have a $5 trillion tax cut. People think it might be a $5 trillion tax cut because the only things he's talked about would add up to $5 trillion in tax cuts mostly for high-income people. But he's been really, really firm that he has a secret plan to offset the revenue loss from that. Those of us old enough to remember, Richard Nixon can remember his secret plan to get us out of Vietnam. He would repeal the alternative minimum tax. He would repeal the estate tax. He would also reform the corporate income tax, and he would cut corporate rates more than President Obama would. One big change is that he would not tax companies that do business overseas on their profits abroad, whereas President Obama would try to bring in more revenue from those activities. In the second hour, we'll talk about what all that means. But actually, none of them would actually be able to accomplish but a fraction of what they promised anyway, so who cares?
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. It is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Thompson. Dr. Margaret Thompson is an associate professor of history and political science and a senior research associate at the Campbell Public Affairs Institute. Her research areas are politics and governance, women and politics, religion and politics, and women and religion in U.S. history. Dr. Thompson's current research concerns the Americanization of Catholic women's religious life, as well as the impact of religion upon American politics and governments. Dr. Thompson, we're so glad to have you with us.
Thank you very much. Can you all hear me? Can you hear me? Good. Okay, so I've been given the small topic of religion and gender. That's two topics. I dressed for the occasion wearing my Nuns on the Bus t-shirt because it seemed to me to combine both of these topics most effectively. Obviously, both religion and gender have become increasingly contentious issues in this election. Whether we're talking about the divisions, especially within the Catholic Church, over things like abortion and contraception, over the public funding of these things through the Affordable Care Act. As you may know, the Catholic bishops said that the Affordable Care Act was a bad thing because it required public funding of abortion, which it did not do. Meanwhile, a variety of other groups, including the Leadership Conference of Women Religious, which is an umbrella group for most American nuns, and the Catholic Health Association came out in favor of the Affordable Care Act. So this has been a divisive matter since 2009. In addition, the issue of contraception, which most of us thought had been resolved back in the 1960s, has become an issue again when it comes to public funding. The question has been framed as one of religious liberty. But I think what we see is a circumstance that's very Romney-esque. You'll remember early in the campaign when Governor Romney said that corporations were people. Well, I think that the Catholic bishops are arguing that Catholic institutions are people, rather than the people who work in them or that are served by them. And so it's the religious liberty of these institutions which they are defending, rather than the religious liberty of the Catholics and others who work for Catholic institutions. 90% of American Catholic believers support the use of birth control, and so there's a division within the Catholic Church. So I'll point that out. I want to point out two other religious issues, and then I'll be happy to engage any questions. One is the fact that, of course, many people thought at the beginning of this election cycle that the really important religious issue would be the fact that Mitt Romney is a Mormon, and that this would become very contentious. Well, it didn't, and I think it's because those who might have been most concerned by his religious affiliation, and those are mostly fundamentalists and evangelicals, believe in disproportionate numbers that Barack Obama is a Muslim, and that's worse. Now, just this past weekend, a minister at an evangelical church in Texas had a sign in front of his church which said, "Vote for the Mormon, not for the Muslim." So it's all very strange. But religion has become a factor in that respect as well. And the other reason that I think religion has become a factor in this election is that very unfortunately when it comes to global affairs, many people have associated the Muslim religion with terrorism. And so there's a great deal of antipathy and hostility to that as well. So those are some of the ways in which those issues have become contentious. As far as gender is concerned, we have all seen how candidates like Mr. Murdoch in Indiana, Mr. Aiken in Missouri have, excuse me, we've got a projection coming up, how they have made statements about women, rape, and abortion that have been extremely unfortunate. As somebody who is a Democrat, I am a faculty advisor to college Democrats at SU, so I make no secret of this. I really want to thank Mr. Aiken, who was almost a sure winner of the seat of Missouri until he made those statements, and Mr. Murdoch, who may do the remarkable thing of losing that seat to the Republicans in Indiana. So gender issues and religious issues are very closely intertwined this year.
is a student getting his master's in public administration here at the Maxwell School. He serves as the vice president of Maxwell Pride, a Maxwell School graduate student group that focuses on LGBT issues in public administration and international affairs. Mr. Klutz has a history of politics and working in politics. As a campaign manager and external communications director, Billy has overseen social media campaigns for local political campaigns and statewide nonprofit organizations. Mr. Klutz, please join us.
Evening, y'all. Tonight's a really big night for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer Americans. It's also a really big night for LGBT politics across this nation. Currently, over 500 LGBT politicians serve in state, local, and federal offices. Of that, 4 lesbian and gay representatives serve in the U.S. House. This year, that's going to change. Barney Frank and Tammy Baldwin are not running for re-election. Mr. Frank is retiring, and Tammy Baldwin is running for the Senate. Tonight we have 12 openly lesbian, gay, and bisexual candidates for the U.S. House and 1 for the U.S. Senate. And Victory Fund, the nation's largest lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender political action committee, has endorsed a record number of 180 openly LGBT candidates for public office. Here's the races that y'all should be watching tonight. First and foremost, Tammy Baldwin's Senate run. Amen. In 1998, Tammy was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives from Wisconsin. Then she was the very first woman elected to Wisconsin, the very first lesbian and only lesbian to this day to be elected to Congress, and the first LGBT person to be elected as a non-incumbent, because Mr. Frank was re-elected as an incumbent. She's running against Republican former Governor Tommy Thompson, and although the polling has been tight, she's going to pull out a win tonight. In the House races, we got Mark Pocan. He's a Democrat running in Wisconsin. He's actually running to fill Tammy Baldwin's seat. It's a very liberal district, and they're used to having an openly queer representative. He's going to win tonight. Some other likely wins are David Cicilline. He won in 2010. He's a Rhode Island representative. He's going to win tonight. We've also got Jared Polis. He represents Colorado's 2nd district, and he's going to win again tonight. For non-incumbents, we've got a really interesting race here in downstate New York. We have Sean Patrick Maloney. He's an attorney. He ran for Attorney General a few years ago and lost terribly in the primary. But tonight, he's running in New York's 18th congressional district against Republican incumbent Representative Nan Hayward. It's garnered a lot of national attention, a lot of money. It's going to be a really tight race tonight. Some other notable firsts in the House race this year are Mark Takano. He's a Democrat running in California's 41st congressional district. If he wins tonight, he'll be the first openly gay man that is also a person of color in Congress. We also have Kirsten Sinema. She's running in the brand new Arizona 9th Congressional District. It's Maricopa County, South Central Arizona, and Phoenix. If she wins, she'll be the first openly bisexual woman in Congress. Also, lastly tonight, the really notable races to watch is Richard Tassay. He's running in Massachusetts in the 6th District. That's Northeast Massachusetts, Peabody. If he wins, he'll be the first openly gay man that's also a Republican in Congress. That's not going to happen, though. Also importantly, tonight we have 4 same-sex ballot measures, same-sex marriage ballot measures. In Maine, we have some history already made. It's the very first ballot measure that votes to legalize same-sex marriage. The wording is unique and has never been tried before. This is also interesting because just 3 years ago, Maine went to the ballot and vetoed the marriage equality legislation their governor had passed. This year they're going to pass it, though. In Maryland and Washington, we have 2 popular referenda. That means that their legislators and governors have legalized same-sex marriage, but they have to either approve or deny it. In Washington, it's going to pass. We've got Democratic Governor Gregory that's really fought for this. The polling's looking great. In Maryland, Governor O'Malley fought for it as well, got it passed, and it's going to come down to the African-American vote. Maryland has a very large African-American population, and even though we've seen a boost from Obama coming out in support of same-sex marriage, we're still unsure how the polling's going to work out there. Probably the most dour outlook tonight for proponents of same-sex marriage is the Minnesota race. Just like 32 other states, Minnesota is voting tonight to outlaw same-sex marriage. And although it's a very tight margin, it's likely to pass, which means that same-sex marriage will be further banned in Minnesota. It's going to make history as the smallest margin of victory, which up until this point has been North Carolina with 61% in favor and 39% opposed. And that's what I have to say.
Thank you, Millie. Continuing on, it is my pleasure to introduce our next distinguished speaker to share his views and insight onto health policy. Dr. Thomas Dennison is a professor of practice in the Public Administration and International Affairs. He is the Director of Programs in Health Services Management and Policy and the Associate Director of the CNY Master in Public Health. He is also Director of the Lerner Center for Public Health and a Senior Research Associate for the Center for Policy Research. Dr. Dennison, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Well, obviously, healthcare has been a really major issue this election cycle. Probably the most, during this election, the most important issue to many people. But it's an issue that's really fraught with values and ideology. So it's really hard to have a coherent conversation based on the technical merits of any approach to solve the problems in our healthcare delivery system. Now, the U.S. healthcare system suffers from three major problems. First of all, millions of people go without financial access to regular care. Healthcare costs are rising at an unaffordable rate, and the quality of healthcare in the United States and the outcomes that we get from the money we spend really are not where we want to be. These are the issues that we should be focused on, but these are not the issues that we're focused on, unfortunately. Now, Governor Romney has not provided very many details about what his health policy will actually be, but he has said that he would immediately repeal large portions of the Affordable Care Act, particularly those provisions that expand health insurance coverage to many people through both private health insurance and through expansion. That leaves us with the status quo as far as access is concerned. He would turn Medicaid into block grant programs, capping the federal share, reducing government spending, obviously, but it would create even a wider gulf between those who have means and those who do not, and make the differences between states more profound than before. He'd make individual health insurance purchased by an individual tax deductible, a move that might be a precursor to disconnecting the employer from health insurance, which is not in itself a bad idea. He would preempt state regulation of health insurance. That would allow the sale of insurance across state lines, something that many people think is a good idea. I don't think it's personally such a good idea to allow insurance to be sold from companies in states that have very little regulation in states that don't have much regulation. So finally, he favors moving Medicare from its current defined benefit model toward a defined contribution plan, vouchers or premium support, in the belief that the market power of informed seniors would be able to force insurers offering lower priced plans to force providers to reduce spending. And if you can follow that, then you can follow a lot of things. These are strategies that are oriented to reducing government spending. Medicaid block grants, encouraging market forces, favoring employers and insurers. These strategies assume that healthcare operates in a free market. Healthcare is anything but a free market. None of these, in my opinion, address the key issues that face us in our healthcare system: access, cost, and quality. Now, the Affordable Care Act addresses the issue of access, but really only the issue of access. That's good, but that's really not good enough. It's the individual mandate coupled with the expansion of Medicaid that are the foundations to improving access in the Affordable Care Act. And these are the provisions that are absolutely the least popular, and the Republicans have vowed to immediately repeal. But repeal that and many of the other things that people like guaranteed issue and the elimination of pre-existing conditions, and those of you who don't get a job immediately out of graduate school being able to be covered by your parents' insurance, those will fall victim along the way. Now, although the Affordable Care Act has a number of provisions that have potential to improve the delivery system through payment demonstrations and some prevention, it's really insufficient to address the underlying cost of care. And the underlying cost of care is really the problem that's plaguing us. Both parties ignore the structural problems in the organization and financing of health care. Neither party has been willing to address the fee-for-service nature of the healthcare system. Both confuse lowering payments to providers with decreasing fundamental cost of care. I think the difference can be reduced to whether you view healthcare as a market commodity or whether you view it as something different, a social good that has to be provided in a framework that assures access to at least a minimum level of care for everybody. So I'm not really happy with either party's lack of focus on the issues. Neither approach addresses the fundamental problems that we have faced. On the issue of healthcare policy, the party beliefs are vastly different, and I find it personally distressing that our current political polarization is keeping us from talking about the real issues that need to be addressed in healthcare, and has at least so far precluded us from addressing the real problems that we face.
Particularly surrounding some very key issues. And now we're going to turn our attention to our two presidential candidates and their personalities and leadership. And we have a fantastic specialist on this. Dr. Margaret Herman is the professor of political science and the director of the Moynihan Institute of Global Affairs. Dr. Herman's specialties are political leadership, foreign policy decision-making, comparative foreign policy, and crisis management. Through her work, Dr. Herman developed techniques for assessing the leadership styles of heads of government at a distance and has such research on over 300 leaders. As a past president of the International Society of Political Psychology and the International Studies Association, as well as the editor of Political Psychology and the International Studies Review, Dr. Herman's leadership styles measures have also been applied to the leaders of transnational NGOs and international organizations. Welcome to the stage, Dr. Herman.
Can you hear me? Good, okay. I get to have the fun part here in talking about these people, these two leaders that we're watching up here and trying to figure out who will win. And I have the dubious honor of trying to change all of your minds, because everybody in this room has a sense of what they think the personalities of these two figures are. What I want you to do first is to think about what Evo Allen, who is a former mayor of Dallas, Texas, said when he defined leadership as being on a moving sidewalk with fire at either end. You're moving, the leader's moving down the sidewalk, juggling several things, and people are throwing things at him or her from the side. And what I want you to do is to think about President Barack Obama stays on that moving sidewalk, focusing on the things he's juggling and the fire. While Mitt Romney, as he's moving down that sidewalk, is swaying to and fro, trying to capture what the people on either side who are throwing things at him are trying to get him to do. And I want to go through two stories that I have actually experienced myself. My brother helped to run President Obama's first campaign when he ran for the state senate in Illinois. And one of the interesting things about the state legislature in Illinois is all of the new legislators have to sit at the back of the room in the worst seats. And what Barack Obama very interestingly did was he chose the very worst seat, but it happened to be by the doorway to the men's washroom. And within 6 months, he had introduced himself and already was known by every one of the other state legislators. So I want you to think about the strategic nature, not sticking himself out in front, but playing almost a behind-the-scenes role. Mitt Romney, I had the fortune of actually having lunch with at a conference at the Interdisciplinary Center in Herzliya, Israel. And we were sitting at a table much like what you all are sitting at. And he indicated that he had 3 speeches that he could give as the keynote in the next 2 hours. And he asked us which of the speeches should he give. And we asked him, well, what are the topics? He gave us the topics. They were very interesting. And in the course of the conversation, we started talking about the topics and didn't really give him the advice that he had asked for. So he gets up at the podium and he reads the first 2 paragraphs of each speech and in effect gives the one that the crowd cheered for. That's what I want you to think about, swaying to and fro. One leader being very strategic. Goals, he has goals, Obama does, but the means can change depending on the situation, and that's highly frustrating to many of us who believe in his leadership because he's never dogmatic or completely takes charge, because he wants to be able to see that what he is doing is feasible and can actually work. Both of these leaders, one, have control of the situation. Obama is more willing to not be out front. Romney needs to be out front. Each of them is very open to information, but it's to people of a different kind. Obama wants as many perspectives as he can have. Romney is much more interested in a small team of experts that are highly loyal to him. I want you to think about 2 different ways of engaging in leadership. Barack Obama is much more interested in being vigilant and seeing what's going on out there, but taking advantage of opportunities. Mitt Romney does everything on a case-by-case kind of basis. So I think it's also thinking about the experience that each of these leaders has. The Department of Defense has a great deal of frustration with corporate leaders who come into the bureaucracy and assume that you can tell people what to do. And in effect, because most of Mitt Romney's experience, except for the 4 years as governor, has been as the head of a hierarchy, the interesting thing will be, can he switch to engaging in the lateral leadership that the presidency actually calls for? Think also about experience. The more experience the leader has had, the more likely they are to base their decisions on that experience and how they reacted to it. The less experience, the more likely they are to act on the predispositions they have, and for Mitt Romney, that will be what are the important stakeholders and what are their desires and interests. If you think about George W. Bush, who was very inexperienced, particularly in foreign policy, it was Cheney and Rumsfeld who became the formulators of that policy. So if you're looking at Mitt Romney and thinking about foreign policy, who are the people that are around him, because they're going to have an enormous impact on what he can do. Thank you very much.
Our final for the speaker tonight is an old friend to us this evening and a very distinguished member of the Maxwell School community. It's my actual honor to introduce Dr. McClure, and he said I had to keep it short, so I'm just going to mention 2 really important points. One, Dr. McClure's contributions to Syracuse University and the Maxwell School are significant. From 1990 to 2003, Dr. McClure was the Associate Dean and Senior Associate Dean of the Maxwell School. As he mentioned, this building we're standing in was also a major project of his leadership. Secondly, and this is the one that I'm going to ask him about when we get a break, Dr. McClure's numerous publications, among them The Unseeing Eye, The Myth of Television Power in National Elections, was named by the American Association of Public Opinion Research as one of the field's most influential books written in the past 50 years. Dr. McClure, please join us.
First rule is don't believe everything you hear about somebody. I've been asked to talk about leadership in this election. And I want to make 2 brief points. First, leadership is not a discrete, standalone quality that somebody possesses, but rather a relationship between leaders and followers, a reciprocal relationship which one shapes the other. and the other shapes the other. It's a back and forth. So when we think about leaders, we need to think about us as well as them. I've been around probably longer and seen more elections than anybody in this room. I have witnessed, covered, studied 16 of the 57 presidential elections in our history. The observation I would make is that this presidential election was the most discouraging of any I have ever witnessed. It was discouraging because our leaders misrepresented nearly everything they talked about. There was almost no truth in this election. We, the followers, are unwilling to listen to the truth, and they are unwilling to speak it to us. In democracies, we get the leaders we choose, and ultimately, the leaders we deserve. At the same time that we're willing to put up with what we all know is a charade of gobbledygook. We are willing to say that we want our presidents to be more and more heroic, to do more and more things. On this house of cards of heroic leaders who will do everything all the time for everybody, built on gobbledygook, we are certain to end up having them fail and to be ourselves disillusioned. I have only one suggestion for the next presidential election. That is that we should all have the gumption and good sense to abolish all future presidential debates, because we all know them to be a misleading soundbite circus, which serves no one, not them when they get ready to govern, and not us as we seek to fulfill our responsibilities as citizens. That's it.
Dr. McCoy, thank you so much.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much.
Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. Thank you so much for paying attention to our 8 o'clock results. We're now coming back and swapping roles. Emily will be out in the field for the
I will be upstairs in the field.
She will be upstairs in the field, so if you have a question for our next speakers, please find Emily upstairs so that you can be sure to get your question responded to. I'd like to remind everybody that immediately following this, we will be announcing Maxwell's election results, as well as giving out, as Emily said, some of our semi-fabulous prizes. So please be sure to enter into those contests and be sure to vote. Make sure you vote and vote often. Now it's my pleasure to bring to you two commentators who are going to be looking at these initial results, looking ahead, and providing us some perspective and some thoughts. We're honored to have Colonel Bill Smullen here with us tonight. Colonel Smullen is the Director of the National Security Studies at the Maxwell School, Maxwell's Senior Fellow in National Security, and a member of the faculty of Syracuse University's S.I. Newhouse School of Public Communications as a Professor of Public Relations. Prior to his appointment at Syracuse University, he was the Chief of Staff to Secretary of State Colin Powell and of the U.S. Department of State beginning in January 2001. Colonel Smullen was a soldier for 30 years and retired from the U.S. Army in 1993. Thank you, Colonel Smullen, for being with us tonight. We also have with us this evening another distinguished commenter. Dr. Thomas Keck is the Michael O. Sawyer Chair of Constitutional Law and Politics and Chair of the Department of Political Science at the Maxwell School. Dr. Keck's numerous publications include his book, The Most Activist Supreme Court in History, The Road to Modern Judicial Conservatism. His article in the American Political Science Review, Party Policy or Duty, Why Does the Supreme Court Invalidate Federal Statutes, won the Houghton Mifflin Award for the Best Journal Article on Law and Courts, written by a political scientist in 2007. Most recently, in a Law and Society Review article, Dr. Keck documented the sweeping policy changes that have resulted from contemporary litigation on behalf of LGBT rights. Combining this research with similar examinations of abortion, affirmative action, and gun rights, he is currently writing a book on the courts and the culture wars during the Clinton, Bush, and Obama eras. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to our two commentators this evening. And Colonel Smullen, could you please begin this evening giving us some of your initial thoughts on tonight's results?
Thank you very much, and I want to applaud the Maxwell School for having such an event as we are experiencing this evening. I think it's good for all of us to have a better understanding of the electoral process. Let me just begin by saying when you do forecasting in elections, there's a philosophy that you better be right than first. Unfortunately, Dr. Keck and I tonight are going to be first rather than necessarily right. But we're going to do our very best at determining what to look at. And the uncertainty that prevails at the moment doesn't lend itself to trying to give numbers, because numbers will change so dramatically over the course of the evening. But I do think we can take a look at certain indicators tonight and pay attention to how they play out. First of all, it's a question of whose narrative prevails. In the case of the president, he has said, give me 4 more years because I'm not finished with what I set out to do. The Romney campaign has advocated that they are indeed committed to turning the country in the right direction. 2 very different narratives. How will they determine the vote? Let me give you some things that I think we ought to be looking at this evening. First of all, the white vote. And there's a category, in the white category, there are subcategories. There's a category of white men, which may lend the vote towards Governor Romney. Of white women, which may lend itself to President Obama. Of white evangelicals, which may favor Governor Romney. So those are 3 categories that we have to look at very carefully. The Hispanic vote, which is growing in number here in the United States, will favor President Obama. The African American vote will favor President Obama. So watch those categories. And obviously watch the states that we have all been watching this evening, and that is states like Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Iowa, Wisconsin, and I think Iowa is going to be the most critical of them all. I would just leave you with one other thought before I turn it over to my colleague, and that is, I think it is so important for us as we tomorrow morning rise to perhaps get an indication of who our next president will be, to look at some of the things that will face that gentleman. I call them elephants in the room. And on January the 20th, whomever opens that door to the Oval Office to leave the country, we'll deal with a lot of elephants in the room, not the least of which will be our national debt, which is at $16 trillion this very evening, and we need to move that in a different direction. Clearly, foreign policy is going to be a critical measure of success, and there are plenty of challenges in that regard. So economic policy, foreign policy, and I would also add to that list our energy independence and our education system, which needs to be repaired. So those are the things that I would look at tomorrow. Tonight we have a lot of, obviously, listening to do with regard to the numbers that are coming in.
Dr. Keck.
Thanks so much. Can everybody hear me? I know the acoustics in here are a little bit crazy. And as Bill said, we're speaking at a time in the evening where we don't actually know anything yet. I'm inclined to keep my remarks relatively brief because the only way we're actually going to learn something is to turn the volume back on those CNN computers. But let me just say a couple quick words, both about what we should be looking for over the next couple hours as we're watching the returns come in, as well as a couple quick words about the Electoral College system that is so significantly shaping the results that we're all watching tonight. So I'm stuck here in this seat over here where I'm having to squint at those small CNN monitors to try to see what's been updated in the past couple minutes. But basically it looks like none of the swing states do we have enough information to go on yet. I've heard from the exit polls and from just some reports online, I've heard a number of anecdotal things that have been favorable to President Obama from Florida, Virginia, and Ohio, but I would very much emphasize that they've been anecdotal, right? AFL-CIO released a very promising exit poll that it conducted of union households that reported a very strong support for President Obama. The national exit polls that were released for Ohio reported the white vote as a declining share of the population compared to 4 years ago, if I'm remembering right, from 82% down to 78%. And if those numbers hold, that's very good news for President Obama, and it's going to be difficult for Mitt Romney to overcome. But the short of it is we don't know anything yet, right? Everybody should be looking at Florida, Ohio, and Virginia in particular. I would say if Obama wins either Virginia or Ohio, the road to victory for Romney is quite difficult. So that's what we should be keeping an eye on over the next couple hours. So let me just say a couple words. I know there's some folks in the room who are relatively new to the U.S. electoral system. I was chatting with a couple people in the room earlier. And if you're new to the U.S. electoral system, right, it can be somewhat confusing, right? We do not hold a direct national vote for president, of course. We have a state-by-state system where 48 of the 50 states will reward their electoral votes on a winner-take-all basis, which creates the distinct possibility that the winner of the popular vote and the winner of the election are not the same person. If that happens tonight, I'm not predicting it. I actually think Obama's going to win both the popular vote and the Electoral College, but I think it's within the realm of possibility that Romney ekes out a win in the popular vote and Obama nonetheless is reelected. If that happens, that is likely to, and indeed should, I think, spark a significant national conversation about reforming our electoral system, to have a system where every person's vote truly does count equally, even if you live in a state here such as New York, where our votes for president are at the moment more or less meaningless. So I'll leave it at that for now so we can all take a look at the results as they're coming in.
So if we could turn up the volume to CNN, and we will maybe get some more information, and our commentators will be speaking in and out, but it looks like we also have a question.
Not necessarily a question, just a quick PSA. We are moments away from announcing the winner of our poll here at the Maxwell School, as well as the winner of semi-fabulous prizes. So let's get excited for that.
And it looks
Who
like
has the mic for or the remote for the televisions? Going once, remote control?
Well, it actually looks like CNN has gone to commercial. So, if you don't mind, we may ask a few questions. Colonel Smolin, you mentioned the federal debt as one of the first things that the president is going to have to deal with, regardless of who wins tonight. A piece of that is the federal deficit is the sequestration and the impact that that's going to have on national security. Could you give us your thoughts on that as a process, where you anticipate that may be going as a process, and its potential impact on national security?
The sequestration was the result of what is called the Budget Control Act, which was enacted by the United States Congress. And essentially what the Budget Control Act and sequestration means is that over the next 10 years, $1.2 trillion will be extracted from various budgets, not the least of which is the Department of Defense, also the Department of State, the Department of Homeland Security, and virtually every department in the federal government. Why? Because we need to get money back into the government till so that we can start reducing the national debt. If that continues, sequestration continues, and it will begin on January the 3rd, 2013, this is going to have a huge impact on national security. Why? Because if you don't have the money, you can't buy the kinds of things that you need to do the job that you are required to do or asked to do. So I think that's going to be a problem. Now, the president said in one of the debates that sequestration would not happen. And quite honestly, I hope he is correct. However, if he is reelected, must do something very quickly to cause the Congress to alter the legislation, to change the legislation, to do something in lieu of sequestration. If Governor Romney is elected, that's a problem. Why is it a problem? Because if the law becomes the law on January the 3rd, and he does not become the president until January the 20th, then he can't do very much about it until he becomes president. So it will begin, and I think that will have an impact on national security to a detriment.
Thank you, Colonel Smolin. I'm being told that we can turn up the volume on the front two screens so that we can tune into NBC as they're giving us some results. And while we're trying to get that volume up so that we can be listening to the results, Dr. Keck, one of the issues that has come up in the discussion about who to vote for is the next president's ability to make judicial appointees. Obviously, the Supreme Court is one of the more high-profile appointees that the president can make, but there are a variety of appointees that the president will make, whichever nominee wins. Could you please comment on, regardless of who wins tonight, what role they may have over the next 4 years?
Sure, it's a major implication of the outcome of tonight's election, right? Not only Supreme Court justices, but all federal judges are appointed by the president for life terms under our Constitution. So it's one of the longest-lasting impacts that presidents have on the courts. And if you look at the makeup of the federal judiciary today, about 53% of sitting federal judges were appointed by Republican presidents. So if Obama is reelected, that number will move back closer towards balance, where historically the federal courts have managed to perform their duties most effectively without getting overly caught up in divisive partisan political conflicts when the courts, broadly speaking, have been balanced between the two major parties, such that it makes it less likely that the courts are going to be regularly issuing rulings that are dramatically out of line with the moderate center of American public opinion. The most important of these appointments, of course, are at the Supreme Court level, and it is, so campaigns always say this every 4 years, and sometimes it's exaggeration, right? You never know for sure how many Supreme Court vacancies there's going to be, but it seems quite likely that there will be at least one Supreme Court vacancy in the coming 4 years. The oldest justice on the Supreme Court currently is Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who, by all accounts, is in good health at the moment, but she has had multiple significant health problems in recent years, and it is highly likely that she would retire in the next 4 years. If President Romney were to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg with a conservative appointee, that would significantly shift the balance of power on the court. The court currently consists of 4 Democratic appointees, 2 appointed by Clinton and 2 appointed by President Obama, who on most issues are solidly liberal, 4 solidly conservative appointees appointed by Presidents Reagan and Bush, and then 1 justice, Anthony Kennedy, who's in the middle. He's a Reagan appointee, he's quite conservative on many issues, but he's been widely described as the court's swing justice, and he does sometimes support liberal results. Right, so if you replace one of those liberals with a solid conservative, which is what would happen under a Romney administration, that would significantly shift the balance of power on the courts for decades to come. Even if Romney were only to serve 1 term, that impact would last long after those 4 years.
Thank you, Dr. Peck. Okay, thank you, everybody. Colonel Smolin, do you have a few comments that you'd like to share with our group?
Just one other thing to think about when you wake up tomorrow morning, and hopefully we'll have some form of declaration as to who our president will become January. That individual, whether it's President Obama re-elected or Governor Romney elected, will have enormous responsibility to choose the very, very best advisors that they can at every cabinet level, at every other critical position that is responsible for advising the President of the United States. Those decisions are so terribly important, and I would just hope that they are made very, very well, because you and I depend upon good judgment, and if those judgments are not made in a favorable way, that we suffer the consequences. So just think about that as the process moves forward.
And Dr. Keck, do you have any closing comments for us?
Sure. I just wanted, since we haven't really talked about the Senate races, I just wanted to throw out a couple words about that. Obviously, most of everybody's attention is on the presidential race, but the partisan control of the Senate remains up in the air as well. And as things currently stand, it looks like Democrats are holding their own and, in fact, poised to potentially pick up a seat or 2 tonight. Some races are too close to call, but Connecticut has been called for Chris Murphy. Maine has been called for independent Angus King, who's widely expected to caucus with the Democrats. It looks like Joe Donnelly has a good shot at taking Indiana based on early reports. If the Democrats, if these races hold and the Democrats manage to pick up a couple seats, that is a result that borders on shocking, right? The Democrats, as most of you know, right, only 1/3 of the Senate is up for election in any given election year. The Democrats this year are defending 23 seats, and the Republicans are only defending 10. A year ago, there was widespread talk of Republicans potentially winding up with 60 seats in the Senate, a filibuster-proof majority after today's election. Instead, it looks like Democrats are certainly going to hold on to their 53 seats and might even pick up a seat or 2. If the results do in fact hold in that way, that is a result that should be of substantial concern to the Republican Party moving forward. Both in 2010 and again this year, they've run into the problem of choosing several nominees for the Senate who've proven with their actions and their remarks to be significantly to the right of the median voter, and for that reason unelectable. And unless the Republican Party can do something about those candidate recruitment practices, that's going to be a major problem for them in elections moving forward in the next few years, whether it's under an Obama administration or a Romney administration.
Thank you very much. Please Join me in thanking our two commentators this evening.
And before we thank them, we just have one question from our audience.
Oh, wonderful. Please.
Oh, I'm sorry, the question has been answered. Thank you very much.
They are so good, they answer questions before they even have been asked. So, please join me in thanking our commentators.